Imagine waking up one morning to discover a drilling rig stomping your backyard, only to find out your own HOA is behind it all. I still remember that cool autumn morning when I first noticed something was off. I had just sat down with my first cup of coffee, enjoying the quiet routine that had become my solace since inheriting my grandfather's property. The sprawling 5 acres behind my modest home had always been my private retreat, a place filled with memories of family barbecues, lazy summer afternoons, and the gentle hum of nature. But on that day, everything changed. I heard a deep, resonant rumble coming from the direction of the back field. At first, I thought it might be a truck rumbling along the nearby road, but then I saw it. A massive drilling rig, its metallic arms swinging back and forth like something out of a sci-fi movie, churning up the earth. My heart pounded as I rushed outside, my mind racing with questions. Who could be drilling on my land? And why? As I approached the scene, I noticed 3 men in hard hats busily marking the ground with bright orange paint, while another was meticulously measuring the distance between 2 points. I couldn't believe my eyes. Here they were, strangers with heavy equipment, right in the middle of my property. I shouted, "What do you think you're doing on my land?" The tallest worker barely glanced my way. Calmly, he pointed to a folded piece of paper in his hand and said, "Sir, we've got an HOA permit." I snatched the document from him and scanned the printed words. Pine Grove Estates HOA. I felt a mix of disbelief and anger. My grandfather's property had been in our family for decades, passed down to me with a legacy of hard work and honesty. I never agreed to be part of any neighborhood association that now seemed to think they owned more than just the manicured lawns of Pine Grove Estates. According to the permit, the crew had permission to drill a water well along the eastern boundary of my property. But I remembered clearly, my grandfather never sold or even leased any part of his land. Confused and frustrated, I marched over to the drilling crew and demanded to know who authorized this invasion. The worker nonchalantly mentioned something about an emergency easement. My heart sank as I recalled a conversation from years ago. My grandfather, in a moment of trust, had signed an easement agreement with the HOA. The document stated that in times of severe drought, the association could drill 1 emergency well on my property. But here they were, drilling not 1, not 2, but multiple wells, all under the guise of a severe water emergency. I couldn't let this slide. I immediately called my lawyer, and soon we were poring over the old documents. The language was crystal clear. 1 emergency well was allowed, and nothing more. However, the HOA was now using vague claims of a water shortage that didn't match the reality. My well in the backyard was working just fine, and the community's lawns were lush and green. Something wasn't adding up. In the days that followed, I observed the drilling operation with increasing concern. Every morning before sunrise, I'd sneak outside with my camera, taking pictures and jotting down notes. I documented every detail, from the orange spray paint marking what looked like multiple well sites to the constant hum of machinery operating in the dead of night. I even recorded snippets of conversations, all while the workers seemed oblivious to my presence. Then came the day that truly set my resolve. I received a neatly printed letter from the HOA. It wasn't just any letter. It listed a series of alleged violations on my property. Overgrown grass, an improper fence height, and even unauthorized structures that had apparently cropped up overnight. The fines were astronomical, totaling thousands of dollars. Felt like a personal attack. They were trying to intimidate me into silence, to make me accept their twisted version of community improvement. But I knew I couldn't back down. I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. I spent hours researching the easement agreement, poring over every clause and every footnote, determined to find a loophole that would protect my rights. It became clear that while the HOA had a right to drill 1 emergency well, there was absolutely no mention of ongoing maintenance or multiple drilling operations. In fact, they had overstepped their legal bounds. The turning point came one restless night. As I lay awake listening to the relentless noise of drilling, a wild idea began to form in my mind. A plan as audacious as it was desperate. I remembered a conversation with a friend in construction, who had once joked about cementing your problems away. At that moment, it wasn't a joke at all. I decided I would use a cement mixer to permanently fill the illegal wells. With adrenaline fueling my every move, I made discreet calls to local hardware stores, purchased bags of quick-setting concrete, and arranged to have a cement mixer delivered under a pseudonym. I couldn't risk anyone connecting the purchases back to my address. That very night, under the cover of darkness and armed with determination, I dragged the cement mixer to the first completed well. I mixed concrete until it was thick and heavy, adding chunks of metal and old pipes to ensure it set solidly. I poured the mixture down the well shaft, sealing it off from any further use. The next couple of nights were a blur of clandestine operations. I repeated the process, moving from one drilled well to the next. Each time, my hands trembled with both fear and resolve as I poured batch after batch of cement into the dark, silent shafts. I felt as if I were fighting a David versus Goliath battle, armed with nothing but concrete and the sheer will to protect what was mine. However, the HOA wasn't going to let this sabotage go unnoticed. The following morning, I was confronted at my doorstep by Margaret Wilson, the HOA president, accompanied by two sharply dressed men. Their faces were set in a mixture of anger and disbelief as they demanded an explanation for the sabotage of their wells. Margaret's voice was icy as she insisted that I was responsible for ruining an operation that, according to her, was vital for the community's water supply. I calmly reminded her that the permit allowed for only one emergency well, and that I had, in fact, taken matters into my own hands to stop the unauthorized drilling on my property. As the confrontation escalated, one of the men mentioned that the sabotage had already cost the HOA over $50,000 and threatened further legal action for what they called felony vandalism. I stood my ground, showing them the piles of photographic evidence, the notes I had taken, and even recordings of their own admissions about exceeding the legal limits. The conversation grew tense, and for a moment, it seemed as if the HOA's resources and connections might overpower my small act of defiance. Yet, as fate would have it, my actions had sparked something bigger than just a property dispute. Word of my cementing spread like wildfire throughout the community. Neighbors who had once been indifferent started to come forward. I began receiving letters of support and some threats from people who either admired my bravery or feared the implications of taking on such a powerful organization. The media got wind of the story, and soon local news crews were following my every move, dubbing me the Cement Avenger. In the weeks that followed, the situation escalated into a full-blown public scandal. I learned that behind the veneer of community service, the HOA had been colluding with commercial developers. The wells were not meant for emergency use at all. They were designed to fuel a series of luxury water features, a fake lake for high-end parties, and even a pipeline intended for a future shopping mall. This wasn't about preserving water in a drought. It was about making a quick buck at the expense of my family's legacy and the natural environment. The tide turned when I presented my meticulously gathered evidence at a town hall meeting. The room was packed with residents who, like me, had grown weary of the HOA's overreach. The County Water Authority director took the stage, unveiling documents and maps that demonstrated how the illegal wells could have drained the local aquifer by nearly a quarter in just the first year of operation. Former board members, previously silenced by the HOA's intimidation tactics, began to speak out. The community was united in outrage, and the pressure quickly mounted on local authorities to take decisive action. Amidst the chaos, I found myself in the center of a legal and moral battle. My lawyer filed for an injunction to halt any further drilling, and soon the county launched an investigation into the HOA's practices. It wasn't long before criminal charges were filed against several board members, including Margaret, whose carefully constructed facade began to crumble under the weight of the evidence. In court, I stood tall, not as a lone property owner, but as a representative of every citizen who had ever felt powerless in the face of bureaucratic overreach. I'll never forget the final showdown. It was a chilly morning when county officials, accompanied by local police and environmental regulators, arrived at my property. They inspected the cement-sealed wells, reviewed my documentation, and spoke with witnesses from the community. The evidence was irrefutable. The county commissioners ruled in favor of preserving my rights as a landowner, and the HOA was ordered to cease all drilling activities on my property immediately. Moreover, the investigation exposed a web of corruption that led to reforms in how such easements were granted and monitored. In the aftermath, my property transformed from a battleground into a symbol of resistance. Neighbors, inspired by my stand, came together to restore the land. Volunteers planted native trees around the cemented well caps, each one adorned with a small plaque recounting the story of how a determined individual fought back against an oppressive system. A community water conservation center was established on the outskirts of Pine Grove Estates, and a modest education building named in honor of my grandfather became a hub for learning about water preservation and environmental stewardship. Now, as I walk along the newly laid community path that curves gracefully around my property, I can't help but feel a deep sense of pride. What started as a personal fight for my family's land evolved into a larger movement for transparency and accountability. I had taken on an institution armed with nothing but truth, determination, and a cement mixer, and in doing so, I had reminded everyone that the rights of a property owner and a citizen are not to be trampled upon. This isn't just a story about drilling wells and cement, it's about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's about knowing your rights, asking the hard questions, and never backing down in the face of injustice. And it's a reminder that sometimes the most unconventional methods, like cementing every hole on your property, can be the catalyst for real change. As the golden light of dusk settles over my land, I reflect on the journey. I think about my grandfather's legacy, the community that now stands with me, and the lesson that corruption only thrives in secrecy. Once the truth is exposed, it crumbles like the hardened concrete in those wells, leaving behind a stronger, united foundation for all of us. And so, my friends, if you ever find yourself facing an uphill battle against overwhelming odds, remember that sometimes a bold, even unexpected act of defiance can pave the way for justice. Stay informed, stay brave, and never let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please consider sharing it, and let's spread the message that no one should ever be forced to surrender their rights, especially not to an organization that claims to protect us but instead seeks to exploit us for its own gain.